Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to Moving Forward as part of SALCHA. We are on part 2 of communicating effectively, and today we're going to be talking about how to communicate in a meeting,
as well as how to communicate with your supervisor.
So stay tuned. My article is from Inc.com, and it is 6 things you need to know about leading a meeting effectively. So, if you do not know how to run effective meetings, your business, your organization, and your career, he says, are doomed.
Oh.
So that's a little dramatic, but we do see the importance of it.
It's true. It can lead to being doomed.
I know. It can be very detrimental. So I just want to go ahead and ask you, what do you think makes a great meeting quickly versus not a great meeting?
I think everybody needs to be prepared. The presenter needs to have a clear leader, and that person needs to be able to keep everybody on track.
Yes, and that's exactly what he kind of talks about.
Oh, score for me.
Yes. How do you, so say you walk away from a meeting and it went really well. How do you feel versus walking out from a meeting where it did not go as you thought?
When I walk away from a meeting that did really well, I feel like I know exactly what's expected of me, the next steps that I need to take, when it's due, and if there was any guidelines as to how to go about doing that in the appropriate manners, those were presented as well. And you also walk away with a united feeling, like, okay, we're a team here. We've come together, we figured this out together, and we're moving forward together.
Yes,
so there's a more unified feel.
And so walking away from a meeting that didn't go as well, how do you feel then?
I feel like I have to have another meeting.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
So sometimes it's that, okay, that didn't go so well, I need to go talk to somebody else so that we can get on the same page.
Or maybe your head's spinning with, okay, did we
Too
talk
many
about
questions,
this?
yep.
Exactly.
You walk away with more questions than you have answers.
Yep. He actually talks about a lot of those. He actually gives us an equation that we can use and apply to our meetings. It says no leader plus no documentation plus no follow-up equals waste of time.
Pretty much.
So you can guarantee if you're seeing any of those red flags that it's probably going to be a waste of time, and you want to do everything you can to prevent those from happening. So every meeting needs to have a leader, a stated purpose, a start and end time, and a valid reason for each and every person to be there.
Oh, that's very true.
Because nothing's worse than being in a meeting and thinking, why am I here? Why was I invited in this meeting? Like, thanks, but really why?
Exactly.
The next one is know what you're doing. Every leader should know how to run effective meetings. And even if it's something as simple as setting ground rules, providing back constructive engagement, and how to bring people to a consensus.
Yes.
Which I thought that one was really important. Because you're going to have times where people get off on a tangent or a certain topic, and it's a good topic, but it's off topic.
Right.
And so the person leading the meeting needs to be able to bring those people back in and say, hey, discuss that later or whatever.
Exactly.
And go from there. This is a really interesting one. He says to have them in the afternoon. So he said, I once read in a Scott Adams Dilbert book that people do their best work in the morning, so you should have meetings in the afternoon. He said, I asked my staff and they all agreed, and it turned out to be a great move for them.
Interesting.
And he also said that most people are more relaxed after lunch. Don't ask me why.
I would think that would be a problem, though, if people are just coming back from lunch, they're more relaxed, their attention span might not be as well as you need it to be in the meeting.
It makes you think of the toddlers after recess where you're like trying to
nap time.
Get them all back on the same page. So I think that we can actually speak from experience here at PayPro Media and SALCHA that our meetings used to be at 9 a.m. on Mondays, and we actually changed them directly after lunch to 1 o'clock, 1 p.m. I wanted to know, what difference did you see since we've done that? Or have you seen any difference?
Well, it did seem that when we moved it later, everyone was a bit more prepared. If we had the meeting at 9 o'clock in the morning on Monday, you're coming in, you're scrambling to get prepared. Because on Friday, let's admit it, we're not thinking ahead to, okay, I need to be able to present what my team is doing on Monday morning, and I'm going to have this all set up. So everybody was kind of scrambling for that first hour of trying to get ready for the meeting. Whereas at 1 o'clock, you've had your time to prepare, you've had your lunch, and you're ready to go again.
I actually think that it helped to make it less tense. And when you feel less tense, you're more likely to engage and speak up a little bit. So I've noticed a difference. I think it's been a really good move on our part.
I think it would also depend on how late in the afternoon you're going. If you're going 4 o'clock, because our content team meeting is at 4 o'clock. It was. Now we moved it to morning, actually. And at 4 o'clock, sometimes other meetings have eked into that time. And so we start our meeting at 4:15, 4:30, and everybody wants to leave at 5.
Yeah.
If not a little bit earlier, if they have to pick up kids or whatever.
Exactly.
So it's not easy for a lot of us to just say, okay, 4 o'clock is going to be the best time.
Exactly.
If we can back it up. So 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, that's probably a good time.
Yeah. The next point he says is beware the hive mentality. He said that he's worked with companies where executives were double and triple booked in meetings most days.
Oh my.
So like an entire day was basically meetings.
Oh, yes.
And then managers were required to have weekly one-on-ones with their boss and staff and monthly with peers. So it becomes too much.
It does.
And there's a fine line, I think, between having an effective meeting and just having a meeting for no reason and it just becoming
a routine.
Yes. So bottom line, don't have too many meetings. Just make the amount of meetings that you have most effective. What signs do you look for that show when a meeting might be necessary or not necessary?
Usually it's when I need to talk to more than one person at a time, or there's a bigger announcement that needs to be made. Just to kind of check in with everybody. Sometimes it also has the feel that, okay, we just kind of need to all get on the same page. It's that team building. Okay, let's just all sit down. Let's all get back on the same page. Let's all brainstorm something together. And then we just kind of are reunited from that point on.
Yeah. So you don't necessarily have a meeting just because it's a routine. It's on your schedule. You have it based on.
We do one. Each week we do have a content team meeting, and it's mostly to kind of go over what we've done in the past week, set goals for the coming week, as well as if we have time, we do article critiques. So a few of us will read an article that we've written in the past week, and we'll each critique it. And so we'll do edits. We'll do what if we said this better, or what about this source, or did you think about this point? And so we kind of have that iron sharpening iron as a team too.
So just a meeting of the minds for you there.
Yes.
That's great. The next good point he makes is lose the hallway meetings. The problem here is that decisions are made without input from key stakeholders. And sometimes hallway meetings can be a smokescreen for passive-aggressive behavior. And it's just not a good practice to put into place. And I think if executives do it, it kind of trickle down and shows the managers and everyone else that, yeah, it's fine. And it's not really something that I think that is effective. So,
well, and sometimes a lot of miscommunication can happen during those hallway meetings because you think something has been agreed upon, but like you said, not everybody has been checked with. And also there's no documentation for it unless you were to follow up with an email and say, as we discussed in the hallway or something like that. But usually something has been made, but then there's no follow through. So it can lead to a lot of miscommunication.
Definitely. And I think the other thing is you're going to feel, if you're in the hallway, you're probably going somewhere. So you're not putting your full attention into that. And so you might say, yeah, sounds good. Go ahead. And then you look back and you're like, what did I just agree to?
Wait a minute.
Yeah. This is a great point here. Challenge the status quo. And I think this is always important to do with everything. But if you run a periodic staff meeting, occasionally ask your team what you can do to improve it and how to make them more effective. You'll usually get at least one good suggestion, if not more than that. And I think everyone really appreciates wanting to give feedback and hearing.
Especially if you take it seriously as a manager. If you take it to heart of what can we do to make this better and really listening to your employees, that does also increase your team.
Yeah, so don't just ask for feedback and then not necessarily do anything about it. If you ask for feedback, make sure and kind of follow up or ask more questions to show that you're interested in what they had to say about it.
Or explain why it hasn't worked in the past or why you aren't able to do that.
Exactly. The next article is from our Salcha Academy, and it's an article from our content team on meeting effectively. So kind of the same thing, but she gives us a couple more tips. She suggests when setting up a meeting, give advance notice. I think that's pretty standard. You should kind of know at least, what would you say, 24 hours to know?
That would be nice. You can't always guarantee that, though, for a new team. Sometimes you will have to say, we need to meet now.
Yeah.
So you have to be a little bit flexible on all accounts.
Right.
So having as much ahead notice is always beneficial.
Definitely. And like when I work with clients, I like to give them at least a 48-hour notice on any meetings that I want to do. Another way to give advance notice is to send out an agenda ahead of time, and this lets employees know what to expect upon arrival. And do you think an agenda is always necessary? If not, why not?
No, I don't think it's always necessary, mostly because if you have those spontaneous meetings of, okay, something came up or some client needs this or we need to work on this together right now, you don't always have an agenda, but you do have one thing that you're going to be working on together. But having that agenda ahead of time, I find very beneficial because it kind of reassures me if this is what's going to happen, then I can be mentally preparing for it. If I can think of, okay, how is this going to affect my team? What questions do I need to ask?
Exactly.
How can I anticipate something coming up or problems that we're going to. Yes. So I do appreciate the agendas, but maybe that's just my little OCD part.
I love agendas too. I would 100% agree. I agree that they're not always necessary. I think another good point is if you're spending a lot of time creating the agenda, you may not even need the meeting. Another good point that Bethany made that I really liked was when leading a meeting, the purpose and desired outcome should be well known by everyone at the start. So is this meeting for brainstorming?
Right.
Is it for planning, decision making, informational? And I think that goes back to what you said of just needing to be in that state of mind and being prepared. It all helps.
That's really important too with introverts. If you're meeting majorly with introverts, they need that time to kind of prepare.
Yeah.
So
I hope you guys were able to take some tips away from that. And a purposeful meeting can leave employees and clients feeling more confident in the work that they're doing. And I think it's so important to spend a little bit of extra time working on how you can become better at leading meetings effectively.
So next we're going to be talking about how to communicate effectively with your supervisor, your boss, your manager, whatever you want to call them. This is kind of just a collection of tips that I've gained from my own work experience, either being an assistant, being on the team, reporting to someone above, being a manager, and also what I've read from other sources. So we're just going to go through and we'll discuss along the way.
All right.
The first one is to take it upon yourself to develop a good professional relationship with your boss. Communication is going to be very much easier if you know how to communicate. You know their personality.
Very much so.
You know how they process. You know how they will interpret what you're saying a bit easier. You will need to understand their personality and their style in order to better communicate with them. I think this is the first step to communicating effectively. So when you first start a job, get to know your boss a little bit.
Take the time.
Take the time. Don't be intimidated. Of course, keep professional boundaries. You're still an employee-manager relationship, and that needs to come first.
Yeah.
There are times that I have worked at places where we did become pretty good friends, but there was still always that, okay, we're at work and this is how it works. Yes.
Yeah.
So what tips do you have to help someone keep professional boundaries and getting to know their boss?
I think there's just certain topics that you maybe don't touch on, or just that being mindful of the filter that you have while you're at work and how you are coming across at all times.
I agree. A couple things from me is ask them how their weekend was. It doesn't have to be all personal and mushy-gushy.
Right.
It can just be, so how was it? What did you do? Did you do anything fun? Don't ignore them in the break room. A lot of times I've seen where a manager comes in to get coffee or something and everybody's like, okay, we should be busy or something. And
I'm so glad it's not like that here.
No, it's not. It's like, hey, come on in. But if you are able to, hey, offer them a cup of coffee or something, just keep that open door. Also, express appreciation for their leadership when it's appropriate. And listen for hobbies or business interests that are common that you guys have. And that can usually lead into conversations that you have that are not always so this is what I'm doing on my project, and or this is the problem that I'm having. So those are good
I think it helps definitely. I think it helps to let them see you as a person and you see them as a person rather than these titles. And
I agree. I agree. And it will depend on the office culture that you have, of how much you can do that. but there's always a bit of room to do that. And yeah, they're people too. They need friends and comrades. The next one is each person has their own communication style. So learn what works best for your boss. If that's by email, if it's by in-person meetings, if it's by phone or text message, depending on what they do best, that's how you need to communicate with them.
Right.
Even if that means that you have to learn how to communicate through those methods.
That's what I was going to say too. Because I know a lot of the younger generations do not feel comfortable talking on the phone, but a lot of bosses, they're going to pick up the phone and call you. So
and a lot
just
of
have to adjust.
Yeah, a lot of times bosses are traveling or they're out doing meetings, and so they're not always in the office. So you need to be able to develop those communication skills through email, phone, maybe text message, depending on and to be able to communicate effectively through that. So practice those skills yourself as well. Also, communication styles might be different, not only from person to person, but during the day, different times of the day and different times of the week. You may have a boss that travels in the middle of the week or over weekends or something, and so you need to anticipate when you need to adjust your communication styles. If that's going to be, okay, now he's in the office, I can go talk to him. Or now he's out of the office, so I need to send an email or somehow mark it as in a way that he will be able to say, oh, this is important, I need to pay attention now.
Exactly.
But know when to do that. That also means that if you know his schedule a little bit better, like say he's going to be out of the office every Wednesday.
Right.
Then you need to anticipate, okay, I'm working on this project. I have today or tomorrow to be asking him about this.
Yeah.
So if you need to work ahead a bit on the project so that you can get your questions answered or whatever, make sure that you're doing that around his schedule as well. Next is know what you're going to say. Any time that you go to talk to your boss, know exactly what it's going to be about. Unless it's one of those in your break room, having lunch or something, you're just kind of casual.
Right.
But a lot of times your boss has a lot of stuff going on. So you can't always expect that they can just drop something, turn from their computer or their task and say, yes, how can I help you? And let me spend a whole hour talking to you. So know exactly what you're going to say, be respectful of their time, and move on. Be very succinct and concise as much as possible.
You mentioned being respectful of their time. I learned to kind of do this practice of just knocking and saying, hey, do you have a minute?
Yes.
Even something like that is like, I think it speaks volumes because a lot of people just would barge in and not be considerate. So,
although sometimes I learned as a manager that do you have a minute doesn't always translate to a minute for some people.
Really, how
so
long?
Sometimes, so for me, it was helpful when someone said, "I have a question," or "I have 3 questions for you about a project."
Oh, that's true.
So
too.
even then, you have to be a little bit more detailed.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
Yeah.
So how do you make sure that you are respecting the time of your managers?
Yeah, that was a really good point that you said as far as take notes. I had an internship where that was one of the feedback that he gave me was, and it wasn't necessarily negative, it was just, when we're talking, just take notes. It'll help you remember and it'll help you be more calm, and so I can ask my questions or just,
Taking notes can also reassure them that you're listening.
Yes.
And also it just kind of gives them the assurance that you've taken it down, you know what to do, you won't have to keep coming back.
Exactly.
Kind of a thing.
I won't have to repeat myself with it.
Exactly, yeah. Next is watch your timing. If you have a quick question, that is a quick pop in the office and ask a question or a yes or no kind of answer, that's one thing. If it's a sensitive issue like issues with another employee or a client really isn't happy and you need to really brainstorm something, it's a bit more extensive, a bit more sensitive. Maybe you don't want everybody else just walking past and hearing.
Exactly.
Schedule a meeting with that person. You need to have that time, that one-on-one time, and also make sure that they aren't going to be distracted. So you can communicate, you can brainstorm together, and you can be clear with each other and be on the same page.
Right.
Next is clearly ask what you need. Don't hedge, don't hint, don't go. I know, I hated that. Just state what you want. Come out and just say it. Just be honest, be upfront, be vulnerable almost.
Yeah, that would be the biggest thing. Is I actually, when I notice someone is kind of dancing around something, I'm like, it's just me. Like, just what do you need?
Exactly.
And that helps them. They're like, okay, well, this, and I'm like, oh, that's fine.
Exactly. I once had an employee walk into my office and he's like, so about this dress code, and he just left it there, and I'm like,
What do you mean?
I'm like, yes, we have a dress code. You got it in your employee handbook.
Do you agree?
I know. What do you want?
Did you eventually get to it? Or?
Eventually, but it felt like for me I had to pry it out. So what's the problem? What's the problem? What's the problem? So you're saying this or you're saying that.
Yeah, don't
And
make
it's
them
not,
guess.
it shouldn't be the manager's responsibility to pry it out of you. If you have an issue, if you have a question, if you have a need, just come out and say it. That's another way of respecting their time. I find that some people find this to be very difficult, to be that upfront and honest with a manager. How do you overcome that personally? Because I don't see you being very intimidated when it comes to managers.
I've had definitely situations though where it was very intimidating, and I probably didn't handle it the best way, but just learning from those situations and building from it has helped me get to the point where I'm comfortable just to come out and say what I need to say. Or I'll write a fake email out. Like I won't even put anything in the...
Yeah, don't put an address in.
Please don't. And I'll type it all out, and that'll help me like visualize the conversation and how it's going to go. Because your brain doesn't know the difference when you visualize and when it's really happening. So practice.
There you go. I agree. And I think it's something that you're going to have to get comfortable with. It's not always easy. I think in some ways we've grown up thinking that if we just hint enough, we'll get our answer. Yeah. Or they'll finally realize what we're wanting. And it's not the case. The more direct and honest you can be, the better for everybody involved.
Everyone.
And don't be afraid to ask follow-up questions. Good bosses will try to anticipate what those questions are going to be and head them off and answer them in the meetings or whatever. But it's impossible to anticipate everything. So feel free to ask. Don't ever feel like your question is going to be bothering someone or intimidating to other people or unnecessary. If you have a question, chances are somebody else in the room does.
Definitely.
But also, if you have a question and it's going to affect your job, you have to get it answered.
Yeah.
And you have to get it answered from the best person possible.
Definitely.
So ask. It's really important to just ask. You also may... if you don't feel comfortable right away, like, okay, I need to process this. I'm not quite sure what the question is, but there's something that I'm not quite clear on.
Yeah.
It's okay to go back to your office and form an email and say, okay, so you said this in the meeting. I'm following up with this question.
Right.
And that can be really helpful too because it creates a paper trail for your reference and also for the manager's reference if you need that later on down the road as well.
And the other thing too is I know it can be very daunting to ask a question in front of a group of people. So even if you're gonna just wait till after the meeting to pull them aside really quick and ask them a question, that's better than not asking.
Yeah.
So.
But again, it's that immediacy of having it answered at that point.
Yeah.
Don't wait a day or two because chances are they won't remember exactly what they said.
I know. Here you are thinking about it, and they're like,
what? How did you get to that point? So just make sure that you answer it or get it answered as soon as possible. Yes. And like you said, most people will avoid asking the questions because they feel intimidated. And again, it's that the steps to overcome that is to have that relationship with the manager at first, be developing that along the way, and also just realizing that they're there to help you do your job.
Yep.
And so if you have a question and it's going to affect your job, you need to get it answered.
And they want you to do well. So.
Exactly. So as a manager, and all the good managers I've worked under, they are there to give you the tools that you need.
Yep.
Okay, this one's going to be a little bit interesting, and I think we could do a whole show on this topic, but it's try to remove as much negative emotion from your communication as possible. It's not always easy. There could be something that has blown up and you're trying to maintain a calm exterior even though your heart is going like crazy or you're on the verge of tears or something.
Right. Yeah.
But when you're approaching your manager, make sure that you're trying to get, even if you have to cool off, so that you have time to process it and cool down. But remove as much emotion from it as possible. You're still a professional. You are still having that professional relationship.
Yep.
So you need to make sure that you've kind of overcome the emotional side, and that you are presenting an issue in a professional way that is going to be a win-win for everybody involved.
Yeah.
There should never be a screaming match. There should never be sobbing, either at your desk or otherwise. There should be a maintaining of and professional interaction.
Yeah.
And it also needs to be a presentation of, when you go to talk to your manager, of this is what I've noticed, this is kind of my solution, would really love your feedback on this.
Right.
Instead of you do this and you do that, and how come you never do this and how come you always do that.
Yeah.
It needs to be a, how can we come to the middle? How can we be on the same page again?
Yeah. What can I do on my part
Exactly.
to help with this?
Exactly. And one way to overcome this is to address an issue before it becomes a monstrous issue.
Yep.
If you see an issue and your stomach or your heart just goes, oh, this is not right, address it then. Don't wait for it to grow and brew and become something that is just too much to overcome.
Exactly.
I've seen some employees that have just sat on something where it could have been easily resolved if they had just communicated, if they had brought it up to their manager.
Yep.
But it got to the point where it just grew and grew and grew over a period of weeks that they quit or they had to get fired for some reason.
It's all because it was a conversation that they didn't want to have, and it would have just been easily resolved if you had had it.
Yeah, and it's not an easy conversation. It never is. No one wants to have that confrontational reputation around the office, like, oh, watch out for so-and-so. She always has a problem about such and such. If you can, approach it with a, how can we make this better as a team instead of I'm upset. So what tips do you have about resolving issues or catching something before it gets to be dramatic?
Probably just goes along with my personality, just checking in, just seeing how things are going, watching how I word things, constantly being conscious of my tone, my body language, you know, that type of thing.
Watching the words that actually come out of your mouth. I mean, you can be thinking all kinds of things, let's be honest, but what actually comes out of your mouth will make or break the conversation.
Very much
so. Be very careful about the words you choose.
Yes.
The next one is to develop your own communication skills. Don't leave it up to the manager to be the only one that's making 100% of the effort to learn your communication styles, come to you to make sure things are okay, ask you questions, be communicating with you the whole time. You need to also be sure that you're learning to develop your communication skills to better work with your team as well as with your manager.
Yeah.
So work on those. I feel that this is a ongoing thing. I mean, it's never like you arrive and you figured everybody else out. I mean, as soon as you think you figured out your team, someone new comes in.
I know.
Or someone old goes out and it changes the whole dynamic.
People change.
Yes. People do change a lot. So make sure that you're developing your own communication skills as well.
And I really think that managers will feel appreciative that you are working on it, or that it's not just him coming to you every time.
Exactly.
It's you bringing things up and showing that initiative. So.
Yeah. And if you need to apologize for something, some sort of miscommunication, take that responsibility and do that. Yep. That will go very far in your business. The last one that I have is to be consistent. Keep a good flow of communication between you and your boss. Again, watch the boundaries. It's not, don't do those funny emails all the time. Don't do the forwards. Maintain your professional boundaries, but try not to be the one that is always going to your boss just because you have a problem. Right. Keep the communication going so that they feel informed about their team. So I did this on this project today, or just to keep you updated, I did hear back from that client, or something. Just keep those lines of communication open as much as possible. And that also goes back to developing your own communication skills. So learn their style, develop your own style as well, and try to be on the same page as much as possible. And that's what I have for today.
Sounds good. So the main point there would probably be start with the building blocks and get that relationship formed right in the beginning.
That's always going to be something that you're learning too. It's not okay, I've been working here 4 months, now I know my boss.
Yeah. That's part 2 of 360-degree communication, and you can connect with me on Twitter at Thought Kebabs, and I would love to hear your guys' comments in the comments below.
And you can connect with me on Twitter at Leilani SQ. Would love to hear your comments about what has worked for you as a manager or as someone reporting to a manager. And next week, join us for...
Next week is part 3 of 360-degree communication. I'm going to be covering self-talk, using positive self-talk with yourself.
And I'll be talking about how to represent yourself, your workplace, well in the community.
Stay tuned.